All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and make a few lids to fit inside of that jar now. And I say make a few because this is a nice opportunity to have a few different varieties of things that could be interesting. You know, so I'm looking at the profile of my jar now. You know, I could make kind of a dome shape that might match some of the curve that's happening. I could go kind of flat or a little bit domed, or a really tall one. So I'm gonna try a couple of different things just so I can play with and see what might be interesting. And as I do that, let me get a little more clay. And as I do that, I'm gonna use a technique that is, it's called throwing off the hump. Basically, I'm gonna use kind of a larger amount of clay, larger than I need. You know, this is probably 5 or 6 pounds of clay, who knows? And my lids might only need to be like half a pound or a quarter of a pound. But that amount of clay is really hard to throw. So I'm gonna show you how to use small bits of clay off of this big piece. But you know, so let's backtrack and talk about how we're gonna make a lid. Let me grab one real quick. All right, so here's a real quick example of a jar, kind of actually similar to the one I made today. We've got a gallery on the inside. I don't really like this example. So this is one style of lid that we can put inside of here, kind of a drop-in style that fits in. Again, we want these to make sure that they don't have a lot of movement when they're inside. Let me find a better example. All right, so here's another jar. Actually, it's a teapot, but it's basically a jar. Here we can see that gallery on the inside. And then this little lid that fits on top. So the way this lid was made, it was thrown upside down, kind of like a little bowl, and then trimmed to be curved like that. And then I put a knob on it. So I'm gonna make, you know, a series of basically little plates or little bowls that can fit that space. And so that might make more sense as it gets going. So I'm gonna move this. So when I'm throwing off the hump, I don't have to worry about all this clay down here. I just need this little small portion on top. And so this looks like it needs to be wider, which is good. And so basically I'm just gonna kind of press in until I get kind of a depth that I like. Again, you know, this is kind of how a lid starts. We got like this little shallow dish. This is way too wide, or I'm sorry, way too narrow. So I'm just gonna pull this a little bit. Compress that. And then, so right now we're still pretty narrow. And so let's go ahead and so as I do this, so I didn't mention this before, but as we make knobs for these, we can do those a few different ways. So basically one way is that I can just make that clean and kind of lid, clean little dish, and then put something on. We'll talk about ways of attaching those. Or I can leave this bottom part right here thicker and then trim a lid or trim a knob out of the lid. So I'm gonna go ahead and press down a little bit more so I have some extra clay down here. Because right now the interior of my lid stops right there, but now I have all this extra clay that I can potentially use as a knob. So I'm going to open this a little bit more. Let's see how we're looking. Okay, almost there. I'm going to go ahead, instead of trying to make this taller, I'm just going to use a rib to open this up like we did with the plates or a bowl. So now I've got too wide, which is okay. I can try and cone that in, or I can just cut it off. So I'm gonna cut my excess off with a needle tool, make this a little shorter, a little less wide. Now let's see what we got. So that looks much better. I'm going to compress this, give this a really nice round rim. Jeez. We'll dry. So why we throw these right upside down like this is because right now I can give this a really nice soft round edge. And if I tried to do this other ways, that wouldn't be possible. Check it one last time. Let's kind of squeeze this in a little bit. There we go. Still a little wide. Okay. I think that'll do it. All right. So again, I'm going to leave all this extra clay down here to trim a knob out of later. I'm just going to take this over to dry. And so I want to be careful as I dry this because this rim's going to dry really fast. So once I can turn this over, well, this thick part obviously isn't going to dry very fast. So I want to make sure that once this starts to get leather hard to where I can flip this over, I'm going to flip it over. So that one got kind of tall, so I'm going to try and do a flatter one that I will end up attaching a knob to. You want to be careful, when I say flatter, I'm not saying flat. If we make a lid too flat, it's going to just collapse in the kiln. So we always want to make sure that there's a little bit of a dome to it. A little wider. All right. So let me just compress this. Get the water out. And again, I'm cutting this much shorter now. So this style will dry much faster. So it's always nice, we have to make 3 different jars. So sometimes I'll try and, when I'm making a series of things, I'll try and, if I'm making jars, I'll make sure that they all have the same gallery size. And then that way I can just make a whole bunch of different lids and just try them out on different shapes and things like that. So I'm gonna make one last style. It was on that initial jar where it's kind of a drop-in style. So I just need to get one more measurement. All right, so this style is a little bit more difficult to throw. So it's definitely on the more challenging side. Some people like it. I don't know that I necessarily like it, but it's a thing. And so, what I figured out a moment ago, what I had to go measure, right now I already have this width measurement, but I need to figure out what the interior of my gallery is so that this can drop inside. It's going to be thrown kind of squared off, but I can trim this curve on later. So that dimension should match this, so I can make this a little wider. And this one, that version I went ahead and added that knob, but I'm gonna try and throw one on this. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but why not? So instead of dropping right in the center, because if I drop in the center, I won't have a knob. I'm gonna drop kind of like halfway between the center and the outside. Like so let's measure that. It's looking good. That, I'm gonna be able to trim that, that'll be fine. And so now I wanna think about, before I do the outside, before I do this part, I wanna make sure that I do my knob first. And again, so you can throw knobs. So I would recommend throwing knobs. Anytime you put a non-thrown knob on a jar, it always looks bad. Just throw your knobs, unless you don't like points. So I've got like this little piece that I'm gonna basically center, which kind of already was. And depending on how big you want your knob, you could hollow this out and make this big kind of like almost like balloon shape, or because knobs are pretty small, they can usually get away with being solid. You can just kind of push on the clay to get the shape that you want. And so that's what I'm gonna do. Just kind of pushing in here at the bottom is gonna give me, we wanna think about a knob, we want something that we can pick up really easily. And so I'm just gonna push this down. I'm gonna compress this bottom really quick for a second. And then I'm just gonna kind of flare this out at the top. As you can see from the top, I'm making a little divot in here just so it's not so thick. And then maybe I could pull some glaze in there and it could be kind of interesting. Could be a mess. Let me just smooth that. And as I trim this, when I go back to trim this later, I can trim inside of here to better articulate this. Right now everything's really wet, so it's gonna be really hard to articulate shapes and if we want lines or things like that. So I can clean that up later or give it better detail later and not worry about it right now. And so now I need to throw what's gonna fit into the gallery. So this outside, I'm gonna go ahead and start pulling up, like so. And then, let's find my width again. Okay, so we need to come out that wide. But instead of just flaring out, I'm gonna kind of drop this so it's a little bit flat, if you can see that on the side. So, all right, so I'm just going to compress that and I think that'll even out. Okay, if you got a bunch of water in there, you want to make sure to get rid of that. And then, last thing I'm going to do, let me compress that mark out of it. So I just want to make sure, I'm going to come in again with one of these wooden ribs with a hard edge. I want to make sure that this underside is nice and flat. Okay. So now again, I don't need to worry about trimming a knob, so I'm just going to cut that fairly close to the bottom. It can be a little thick, it's okay. It's getting trimmed regardless. And now it'll lie in white. Okay, so one last thing real quick before I let those have a little dry time. So I still have a bunch of clay here. I can think about throwing some knobs. And this can be kind of a fun thing to, trimming them gets kind of basic. They all kind of look the same a lot of times. But now, with just a little bit of clay on here, I can just experiment with a few different things. And again, some of this is easier to trim into when it's later. You could attach it and then give some more details. little fun spiral. Sometimes these are hard to get with a wire tool and not have them knock off, so I'll just use a needle tool to come in at the bottom and just grab that. Again, a little bit lower than it needs to, and I can just cut all that excess off. With knobs, it should kind of have a reflection of what the body looks like. You want there to be some repetition or continuity. With these wheel thrown jars, I highly recommend not doing little blobby squishes of clay. You're just not going to get a grade for that. So say I have this solid thing, and I can just make treat this like a little pot, you just kind of drop my center in. If I want like a really big knob, sometimes forms really just need kind of a big, heavy knob. And I can just pull this. It's a little bit more difficult, you'll find, trying to throw small things. But I can throw this into a shape. I can leave it open. I'm gonna come down a little bit. I could leave it open for some reason. I can close it off if I want kind of a big globe-like kind of thing. Again, if the form dictates it needs that. I can close this off to be hollow. And again, it's always going to look bad as you're closing it off. But once it gets that air inside of there, you can really kind of push on it. You just want to make sure to compress that top. A knob even this size is solid, is kind of on the borderline of cracking or blowing up from moisture content. So you really want to make sure that you don't, if they get larger, you don't want them to be solid. Take the time, do it right. Again, I think just a couple more kind of random things. I'm gonna give it a little spiral. Maybe your piece has some spiral, a little zest. So maybe I faceted my form. I can facet this. Sometimes this can be interesting. Again, it just form dictates if that's interesting or not. Oh, hello. How's it going? All right.